Hey everybody, today's firearm of discussion is one that might surprise you. You might be surprised to find that this is one I have in my collection. This is the CZ52. This is a Czechoslovakian pistol that was made between the years of 1952 and 1954. Only about 200,000 of these were made, and it was used by the Czechoslovakian armed forces for about 30 years. This was their standard sidearm from 1952 all the way up to 1982, and then it was eventually replaced. This is a really interesting firearm for a lot of reasons. For one thing, the caliber. This is a 7.62 by 25 millimeter round. Essentially what we have here is what's become known as sort of a armor defeating round, because it's a it's a relatively small bullet. It's a small projectile traveling really, really fast. I've read that with the CZ52, as of a few years ago, it was possible to purchase aftermarket, custom-made aftermarket 9mm barrels and drop those into the CZ52, essentially putting it in 9mm, which would make it a lot more convenient for the shooter, because finding 9mm versus finding 7.62 by 25, there's no debate there. You know, the 9mm round is much, much more common and much more affordable. That's another thing about this caliber, 7.62 by 25. If you can find it, it tends to be fairly expensive. I would liken it maybe to the cost of maybe 44 mag, or maybe even a bit more than that, depending on where you're looking. It's definitely not going to be as affordable to shoot as, say, 9mm or certainly not 22. However, mentioning 22, I read something interesting about the CZ52 that I thought I would mention. I found on a website that in the early 2000s, there was a group out of Oklahoma City that designed a drop-in replacement barrel for the CZ52 that used the 7.62 by 25 Toke case necked down to 22 caliber, and they named it the 22 Reed Express. I don't know, just imagining a 22 caliber bullet coming out of a firearm this large, this heavy, is kind of comical to me. But apparently the cartridge is capable of sending a 30-grain bullet over 2,500 feet per second. So that's not too shabby. I'm not sure what the point of something like this would be in 22, other than just taking it to the range and maybe giving your buddies kind of a laugh. But apparently that barrel has not been manufactured since 2009, so the website says good luck finding it. This particular firearm was purchased from a local gun shop in the late 90s. The man running the shop had a sign on the counter, basically saying that he was getting ready to make an order for some kind of, I guess you could say, exotic handgun, some stuff you don't normally see just sitting in the gun cabinet at your gun shop. Said he was getting ready to place an order, and if you were interested in anything, to talk with him, and he'd tell you what he could order and essentially place an order for you. And so, long story short, 2 of these were purchased by the shop owner, and then this is the one that came home. It's in excellent condition. It has been safety checked, I'll say that. It's in excellent condition, considering where it came from. I don't know exactly the story of this pistol's history, you know, from its birth, but I can say that this handgun has probably traveled many a mile to get here where it is now. And that being said, you know, it's in excellent condition. Beautiful blued finish. You know, no real cosmetic issues with it at all. Just a nice, a well-finished firearm. A couple of things about this, just impressions that I've got from it. For one thing, it does not have a good trigger. The trigger is all right, but it's kind of mushy. It is a single action only pistol, of course, but it doesn't have that nice, clean feeling, that good break that, say, we get from things like, you know, our 1911s. It's a little, I'll just say it's mushy. It doesn't have a nice, clean break like you would expect. Recoil, it's not too bad. It's not too bad. If you're recoil sensitive, you may not like it. If you don't care, you'll probably feel pretty at home firing it. It's not too bad. A couple of things about the mechanics of it here, and I apologize, I'm trying to get everything in frame here. It does have a decocker, which I found really interesting. By pressing the safety up, it then decocks the firearm. And that kind of surprised me, finding that on a firearm this old. I mean, as far as its design, that you know, a firearm this old, 1952, I was surprised to find that. Kind of a neat, handy little added feature there. The slide on this firearm does not have a real sturdy lockup. I don't know if you can hear that. There's a little bit of wobble in that. Not much, maybe not even enough for you to see it. But there is just a little there, okay? So, you know, as far as the cosmetic finish of the firearm, I think it's a beautiful gun. But once you actually get it in hand, you notice a few things like that. A little wobble in the slide. The grips, which are some kind of a bakelite material, the grips are also, they're a little, I don't know, there's a little bit of play to them. You can see that. I know you can see that. Okay, it's not much, but, you know, when you get something in hand like that, especially if you're making a purchase, you know, we're all looking for any signs of weakness in whatever we buy. You know, we want to feel secure in a purchase, and we don't want there to be any wobble, any play. We want everything to lock up and feel good and secure, good and smooth. So just a couple of little things like that you'll notice with some of these, you know, European handguns. I do like the ease of takedown with this firearm. I'm not going to do it right now just for the simple fact of I'm afraid I'm going to knock my camera over here if I do, because it kind of takes some moving about. But it's pretty simple. Essentially all you do is you bring the slide back slightly, and this little tab here on the front of the trigger guard, you pull it down, and then the slide just comes right off. That's all there is to it. And putting it back on is basically just as simple. You put the slide back on the frame. There's a little lug here you have to line up and make sure it lines up just right. And you pull down the tab and just rack the slide back, and you're back in business. So it's pretty nice in that regard. Okay, some things about if you were to think about carrying something like this, because I certainly did. It's listed, its weight is listed at 2.9 pounds. And I'll say you feel every bit of it. It's definitely not a lightweight EDC piece. You know, this is going to be blown out of the water by something like the LC9 or even in really essentially any of the Glock 9mm. You're gonna feel like you've got a lighter package if you're carrying basically anything other than this, aside from a 1911 maybe. So it's got some weight to it. It's got some heft to it. The grip on this is kind of interesting as well. You may not be able to tell it just from looking at it, but the grip is really wide. Okay, it's and that's probably, it helps translate into some of that absorbed recoil. A nice wide back strap. You've got a lot to get a hold of. I've got I guess medium-sized hands, medium to large, and that's about all I can get around that grip. But it feels very wide. Even comparing this to, say, my Springfield 1911, it feels wider. I can get a little bit more finger back across the grip of that 1911 than I can with that CZ. So that's kind of interesting. As far as size, frame, dimension, all that stuff, it's very similar to a full-size 1911. Barrel length, width, 1911 might be a little bit more wide than this. This is a fairly slim firearm. But overall dimension, if you were to carry a 1911, switching over to carrying something like the CZ52 is going to be kind of a lateral move in terms of size and dimension. Okay. Let me think if there's anything else worth mentioning. I was excited to kind of do this short little review just because this is a firearm that you don't see all that often. And maybe that's for good reason. Maybe people just decided this is way too expensive to enjoy shooting. And that's maybe part of why it faded out of style. But I like it. I really like the looks of this pistol. It's nice and smooth. Okay, there's no real rough edges anywhere on it to catch. It's just got a nice slim, sleek feel to it. And like I said, other than the trigger, it is fun to shoot. The recoil's not too bad. It's just that kind of that mushy trigger. As far as capacity, that's one thing I didn't mention. It is 8+1 round capacity. When this firearm was bought, it came with a really nice leather holster and kind of some interesting markings on the inside of that leather holster there. But it came with leather holster and spare magazine. Okay, so essentially it was bundled up just like that. Nice, neat looking little package. As I fumble around with the latch. Well, anyway. So, having the original leather holster with it, that's pretty neat. Adds to the cool factor for sure. And then the extra magazine that they sent with all of these pistols. Again, kind of a neat thing. Which I think nowadays is pretty common practice. Anytime you buy a firearm now, it probably comes with a spare magazine, at least one. But even way back in the early 50s, still came with a spare magazine. Which, for it being carried by, military personnel, that's not surprising. They would want to at least have 2 magazines. But yeah, 8+1 capability. This is a hot little firearm. Like I said earlier, it is sort of known as a armor defeating round because it is traveling so fast. I know that shortly after this was purchased, my grandfather was shooting it with a friend of his in their own personal range and in their backyard, and my grandfather's friend brought one of his own targets, a steel target, and when my grandfather shot it with this firearm, it put a pretty serious dent in that steel target. So I'm not sure what gauge the steel was or anything, but that's a pretty significant thing. Firearm putting a welt like that in a steel target, you're dealing with a pretty high powered round. So just one other thing that kind of makes this an interesting firearm. So anyway, hope you enjoy it, guys. Any questions, just send me a message. I'd be happy to tell you more about it. We'll see you next time.